we'll start with Joe Burrow. A couple of years ago, I was probably a little bit lower than consensus on Burrow. He'd kind of creeped into that top 3 or 4 dynasty quarterback range. He has definitely shown us that kind of upside. He's struggled with injuries more than maybe we would have expected, but I'm not sure how predictive that is because it seems to be a different thing every time. I've got him right now ranked at QB6, but he feels to me like he's closer to QB8 than he is to QB4. A very, very good number 1 quarterback who's going to be that for the next 5 years. But I'm not sure that he actually has that QB1 overall upside. How do you feel about him, Kyle?
I literally think you could copy and paste every single thing that you said, and that was going to be what I summarized for Joe Burrow. Yeah, the injury history, and the fact that he seemingly is dealing with something every single year is definitely concerning. But yet, like you mentioned, it's not like this is a hamstring issue for him every single year that creeps up at the same time, right? Like it's a completely different, like a thumb popping issue, like that is so completely fluky. Like we can't hold that really against him, or his calf, going down in training camp. Like that isn't something that we can really hold against him. We know the talent level. We know what he can be when he's got all of his weapons and everything is operating, the way that it should. So I think Burrow he's at QB6 for me as well. He's right in that territory. And it's really interesting once you get past, I've got Josh Allen at QB1 in Dynasty, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Then really once you get to past that top 3 tier, then it's Jalen Hurts, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, Anthony Richardson, Justin Herbert for me. And I feel like if you want to put Justin Herbert all the way up at QB4 in Dynasty, I'm fine with that. And you want to put Jalen Hurts all the way down at QB8, I might have a slight disagreement with that, but that's a tier for me that you can kind of shake any of those guys up and roll the dice, and wherever they land is where they land. So
you mentioned that the weapons, and that was kind of my second question on Burrow, because T. Higgins, we talked about it earlier this week with Joey Wright, one of the guys who is a free agent. I think most people expect T. Higgins is going to be back with the Bengals for one more year. I've got zero expectations beyond that, though. Yep. How much does that matter to you? We've mostly seen Joe Burrow with some of the best weapons in the NFL. If he's going into next year or the year beyond, and it's Jamar Chase locked up for the long term, it's Joe Burrow locked up for the long term, but it's going to be kind of a Patrick Mahomes situation. Other than that, we're going to have to just kind of put the pieces together. Do you think that impacts Burrow's upside?
Yeah, so you mentioned this next year. The Bengals, according to Over the Cap, have $53 million in effective cap space for this year. So the ability to franchise tag T. Higgins for this season is absolutely, I think it's a slam dunk. Like, they're going to do it. I feel very, very confident in that. Past that point, like you mentioned, though, there is some unknown where can you really go into this 2025 and beyond with needing to lock up Jamar Chase? You've got Joe Burrow locked up, but you sign T. Higgins to a long-term contract extension. That is a massive amount of money to dump into 3 players for your entire team. I think Tyler Boyd's gone this next year, so I think that because he's a free agent this offseason as well. So I think that for at least 2024, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, they're going to be reunited. They're going to be that trio. But then you've got some really, really interesting depth options as well with Andre Yoshivas, the wide receiver out of Princeton. He'll be going into his second year. He showed some flashes this past year. And then Charlie Jones as well, who I think is going to be the Tyler Boyd replacement in this offense for 2024. So it's Joe Burrow. And I think that we've seen he was one of the best, if not the best quarterback prospects coming out over the past 10 years. Like, everyone's like, oh, Trevor Lawrence was the best quarterback prospect coming out since Andrew Luck. I'm like, guys, we've already seen the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck come out, and it was Joe Burrow. The talent level's there. He can elevate his weapons just like Patrick Mahomes does. But we've seen him be the most effective when he has these truly dominant wide receivers at his disposal. I think he can elevate Andre Yoshivas. I think he can elevate Charlie Jones. But if they can go into and prioritize that position for 2025, and they go into that 2025 NFL draft and they draft a wide receiver to pair with Jamar Chase, reset that salary number for that wide receiver 2 down to a lower, let T. Higgins walk or trade him away, I really don't have as many concerns with Joe Burrow long term. It is now all purely the injury history and actually the reliability. Can you truly rely on Joe Burrow? And I think that the injuries have been more fluky than anything else, and we will eventually see that start to normalize.
I want to talk about another quarterback who had some injury concerns coming into this season, Tua Tagovailoa. We all know how bad the concussion situation was in 2022 did not resurface at all in 2023. I guess the martial arts training worked. He learned how to fall. He no longer hits his head when he falls. That's fantastic. But the production wasn't actually elite. And he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle right now. Tyreek Hill, who said he's not going to play that much longer. I've got Tua at QB 12, and part of that's the fact that he's a borderline QB 1 who's young enough that he could have a very long future. At the same time, if he doesn't have Tyreek Hill, or if the injury issues resurface, which a concussion much more troubling for me than the injury issues Burrow's had.
Yep.
How confident are you that Tua is even a starting quarterback in the NFL 4 or 5 years from now?
Oh, man. Okay, there's so many layers to this question. I think that how confident am I that he's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL? Very. I think that Tua Tagovailoa will still get, if it's not a long-term contract extension with Miami, whatever, he will get a starting role somewhere. Now, the best fit for him, though, is to stay united with Mike McDaniel over the long term. That means that he's got to get that long-term contract extension from Miami. Will Miami give him the long-term contract extension because of the injury history and the durability concerns? Who knows? So I think that from a dynasty perspective, as soon as we have clarity on that, that will greatly dictate where Tua lands within my dynasty rankings. You said you got him at QB 12. I've got him at QB 14. Then that's just behind Kyler Murray and Jordan Love. So I would rather have Jordan Love than Tua Tagovailoa in dynasty over the long haul. Imagine saying that several years ago. I would have just been absolutely laughed off the face of the planet. But what we saw from Jordan Love here this past year was pretty special. So, yeah, Tua, I think over the long term, I think that he will be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But for him to be a top 5, top 8 fantasy football quarterback, because he brings very little, if nothing, to the rushing conversation, he's got to have the elite weapons. He's got to be in this offense that caters to his strengths, because we've seen when he's in an offense that doesn't cater to his strengths, he's not anywhere near the fantasy starting quarterback radar.
Well, and I think it's not just the angle of does Tua get the long-term deal, but the Dolphins probably have to make some progress in the next year or two, or he could be on the Dolphins and not tied to McDaniel. So there's multiple ways that this could go wrong. It does seem like the combination of his head coach, Tyreek Hill as a wide receiver 1, Jalen Waddle as a wide receiver 2, it's probably not getting any better than that. Right. And there's lots of risk of it getting worse. And this kind of goes back to the super flex point. In a 1 quarterback league, I'm not super confident that Tua is going to be fantasy relevant in 4 or 5 years. In a super flex league, you're right. He's probably going to be a starter in the NFL, which is going to make him fantasy relevant in that format.